Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the RealNex webinar series. Today we have a great program for you on virtual reality for real estate. Virtual reality for real estate is here. Are you ready for it? Today we have two of the foremost authorities on the subject, Mike Lairg and Chris Sayre. Mike is the CTO and creative director at Pix Virtual, and Chris is the lead technical artist for Pix VR. Both have long esteemed careers in the virtual reality industry, both at the government, military, and corporate sectors, and have most recently applied their expertise to the real estate sector and have done a tremendous amount of work bringing virtual reality down to earth for us to begin to consume and take advantage of tools and technology that more recently were unattainable are now readily available and deployable for both commercial and residential real estate projects in scale. And we're really excited to be working with them to talk to you today about the latest state of the industry, the sector, the technology, and how it applies to real estate. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you and we will get started. During the session, there will be a couple of polls that will be coming up, and we'll ask you to respond to those polls in the dialog box that'll show up on your screen. And towards the end of the session, we'll tee up a series of questions. So use the question feature on your the right of your screen to queue up your questions. I will moderate them and work with Mike and Chris to answer your questions. So really appreciate your joining us today and look forward to working with you in this exciting new realm of commercial or real estate in a virtual world. So Mike, turn it over to you.
Hey, Mike, you might be muted.
Oh, there we go. All right, sorry about that. So Chris and I have worked together for over 15 years through multiple industries, as Jeff had mentioned, and yet we've never seen virtual reality used as prevalently as it is now today. But just as social media was a trend 10 years ago for personal use and for entertainment, it's now become mainstream, and that's where virtual reality is now becoming. I don't know if you heard this last week, but there's actually a 16-year-old who won $3 million by playing a video game called Fortnite at the World Cup. So it's definitely expanding and growing quite extensively. So in this webinar, we'll definitely be discussing how it's disrupting the real estate market. You'll see that it's evolving quickly, and given some of the information that we'll be giving, you can no longer ignore the facts of its growth and its magnitude of the industry. We'll be discussing some of the myths of people believing that technology is either too large and bulky and expensive or cumbersome and difficult to use. We'll be walking through that. And then in terms of technologies, there's several different types of technologies that can be used for VR experiences depending on your use case, what area of expertise you have, and what your audience is. And then we'll be going into the prevailing uses of VR in the marketplace. So as I was mentioning, just a few years ago, social media was just for personal use. And if anybody had mentioned about using social media in a business setting, it was unheard of. Nowadays, it's talked about throughout almost every business has to have some type of social presence. Same thing as for virtual reality. Over the past few years, it's been growing in its capabilities. And now with some of the technologies that have evolved between passive and active virtual reality, which we'll get into, it's now becoming a mainstream media type that if you're not using it, then you're going to be left behind by the others that are.
You know, and to add on to that, you may even find that you have used virtual reality and you don't even realize it yet. That's a big takeaway from this as well. It's so prevalent that you probably have at some point interacted with it and used it, and maybe you just haven't realized it or seen it as virtual reality because you have a misconception of what virtual reality is and what it's used for.
So our first polling question is, how would you best describe your experience for using VR in your business? I use it regularly when appropriate. I've tried it, but not with regularity. I hesitate to try it given concerns about cost. I hesitate to try it given concerns about complexity, or I don't understand the value. So the poll is now open. We're seeing some results coming in. Large factor being the lack of understanding of the value.
And we'll give it just another few seconds and we'll wrap it. And I think we are ready to close the poll. Got most of the votes in. Share the results here. And if you can you see the results, Mike?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect.
So it looks like 61% voted, with 50% I don't understand the value. Next would be 23% that I hesitate given the concerns about cost. 14% concerned about the complexity. 9% have tried it but not without regularity, and 5% are currently using it regularly. Which, given some of the other statistics that you'll see coming on board in the coming slides, I think the 50% will find some key interest in the values and the applications that will be presented.
Yeah, I'll add too that, Mike and I have discussed, obviously putting together the polling questions in advance. We've discussed together where we kind of had our expectations of what we, would assume people would answer in the majority of, and this did fall right in line with what we were expecting, and we hope that by the presentation, not only do you walk away understanding better the cost benefit, but exactly how it pertains to your particular area and why it's so valuable.
So one of the things that you'll see in these studies and the results coming up is virtual reality, in terms of the innovation adoption life cycle, has clearly entered the early majority phase, with approaching up to 50% usage in terms of virtual reality. And augmented reality is currently in the early adopter phase. But given the investment numbers that you'll see, augmented reality and virtual reality will both be accelerating quite quickly in the coming years. So this is a financial chart of the investment over the last 5 years by quarter in the augmented and virtual reality market. One of the key things is there's been over $8 billion invested in the market in just the last 5 years. And that's an increase of 2,500% over that same time period, which is going to continue to accelerate the progression of the use and the technology's functionality, ease of use, ease of distribution, as those investments become mainstream products instead of research and development. So some of the key players in the industry, number one is Facebook. They bought the Oculus Rift for the head-mounted display hardware for over $2 billion just 5 years ago. Microsoft is investing billions of dollars in the HoloLens and augmented reality technology, mostly targeted at enterprise, but that will become mainstream technology over the years. Google is leading the way for educational markets and low-cost solutions for virtual reality. Amazon is providing the backbone of the network systems across the globe for distribution of virtual reality solutions and experiences. And then Intel and NVIDIA are creating the chipsets that drive the technology and make it possible for mobile devices to support very realistic experiences. So in terms of real estate, now virtual tours, many of you may have experienced 360-degree images or 360-degree videos. That's a passive VR experience, which we'll get into later. But that is becoming very prevalent in terms of capturing an existing property. And so that's, a lot of people call that virtual reality. That's one form of virtual reality. But virtual reality in general is great for pre-visualization and new developments, When you're talking about 3D technologies, we can then build virtual buildings before they're built to give you tours and make the experience in ways that haven't been explored before in the real estate market. In terms of architecture, obviously the design phase of being able to give a tour of the property during the design phase gives you a very quick and repetitive iterative cycle of making design changes on the fly and experiencing it by standing in the virtual space itself. In terms of engineering and incorporating BIM or building information model information, engineers were able to deconflict the different infrastructure elements of a building from HVAC to plumbing, electrical, structural, making the process much more smooth and cost and time effective. And then in terms of construction, virtual reality, when combined with either drone-based photo capture, LiDAR scanning, other ways of capturing the actual environment of the construction site as is, compared to the as-drawn building plans, you can actually find 5 times more change orders during the actual design phase that it's in, rather than after it's into the next phase, which really makes the cost of construction go up. So there's huge cost savings there. In terms of real estate, Coldwell Banker back in 2018, for brokers, you may find it interesting that out of 3,000 American adults, 75% said they would like to experience a VR tour before going to see a property itself. So you can see, 10 to 20 different properties virtually before going to visit any one of them. In addition, 66% prefer to choose a real estate broker who offers VR tours as a service over those that don't. So again, 2/3 of the audience of this survey would prefer to use a broker that actually offered VR services as part of their offering.
And think of it this way as well. So, time is valuable and time is important to everybody. Time is your highest commodity. It's the thing you've got that, you can't put a price tag on. And so, if, let's say somebody's interested in looking at a home with 2 bedrooms, whatever it might be. And, as a broker, you've got all these ideas for them. And, let's say you've got 20 homes to show off. So now you're taking them around to all these different places. And at the end of the day, they go, something really, none of those spoke to me at all. In fact, not only did they not speak to me, I really didn't like any of them. I wouldn't have gone to see them to begin with. But think about how a virtual tour can help streamline the experience and make it better for both you and the client at the end of the day. So, what we're really talking about here is giving somebody the ability to understand and make better decisions, better choices, and better manage their time as well as your time. So that's a big part of this is, getting that information shared to somebody in a more effective and meaningful manner.
Chris, just to be clear, and you talked about the survey for Coldwell Banker was residential, and your use case was residential, but clearly residential has led the way of technology adoption prior to it coming into the commercial space. So that same sentiment is now beginning to move rapidly from that residential consumer and the populace in general and how they look at technology to wanting it in their commercial business decision making and workflow as well. Everyone, whether you're towards industrial, office, retail space, the ability to do it as efficiently as possible and save as much time as possible is critical, and it's possible.
Yep, that's a good point, Jeff, and that's something we will, and as we go along here and show some examples, hopefully we'll make that extremely clear how this can benefit you and why it's important to your particular background, and be it commercial or multifamily, whatever it might be. We have an example for it. So
one last set of statistics here in terms of the industry's growth. From Goldman Sachs report, in 2020, it's expected that 130,000 brokers will be using virtual reality, and real estate revenue driven by the use of VR will be $750 million. By 2025, that's going to grow to 300,000 brokers using the technology and a real estate revenue of $2.6 billion, which is an increase of over 230% of the brokers' use and almost 350% of the revenue in just a 5-year period. So we have our second poll question is, how might you use VR in your business? And you can check all that apply here. Encouraging pre-sales and pre-leasing, improving current sales or leasing, facilitating development in terms of approvals and construction permits, stimulating investment and capital raising, or if you're still unsure. The poll's now open.
Looks like we are ready to wrap it up, and I will close the poll.
Can I share it? No. So out of those that responded, 60% voted. 73% said they want to improve current sales or leasing. Next is 55% in encouraging pre-sales or pre-leasing. Then 50% is stimulating investment and capital. 36% at facilitating development approvals. And then 23% are unsure is the results of that.
All right, so we got 23% we got to grab a hold of and really throw it at them so they can understand better. This is pretty good.
You've got your work cut out for you guys. Let's explain the value.
That's right.
So one of the key things is a lot of people consider VR to be too big, too bulky, too complicated. This is an example you're seeing on the left of VR technology from the 1980s. You can see that it involved a lot of computer equipment, definitely not mobile, and had a very limited level of functionality and realism. A lot of computational power for very little return on investment in terms of its capabilities. And yet, just 40 years later now, with an iPhone 6 for $100 and a $10 clip-on lens, you can now have a VR experience that fits in your pocket that provides you a photorealistic experience mostly in a passive VR experience, as we'll clarify later here.
Yeah, and think about that for a second too, and not to belabor the point here, but you look at where we were back in the 80s and where we are now, and I'll guarantee you, every single one of you has a VR-ready device in your pocket. Your phone is the quickest entry point into this technology, and everybody's got it. So it's not like you've got to go out and you've got to buy something and you've got to, expend a whole bunch of money to do it. You've already spent a bunch of money on your phone. You've got your phone there, and it's a portal for VR. That's a big one right there. And you can be guaranteed that, most people you're interacting with, I say most, I really mean almost everyone, even kids have them at this point. Everybody's got the ability to run a VR tour, wherever they're at.
Great points, Chris. Thanks. So the other aspect is the cost of the hardware. Up until recently, you needed a gaming computer that might cost $1,000 to $2,000, plus the head-mounted display costing another $1,500, and definitely was not a mobile solution. But nowadays, you have solutions from a broad spectrum, from $10 to $400, that give you a variety of user experiences, level of immersion or presence, the sense of being somewhere, and the level of interactivity. So depending on your use case, your audience, and how you want to distribute it, there really is a solution there's not a one-size-fits-all. We can actually customize it to meet your needs. As an example, the Google Cardboard on the left there's dozens of styles of that nowadays made by dozens of manufacturers, but you can actually have them custom printed and branded with your company's logo on it, contact information, have them be handouts. If you buy them in bulk, they're less than $1 a piece. Snap in your phone, and you then actually have a VR experience on the fly. In addition to using head-mounted displays, another way of experiencing virtual reality is actually just with your standard devices. Basically using your desktop, tablet, or phone, the screen becomes a window or a portal looking into the 3D virtual environment. In the case of the mobile devices, as you tilt and turn the device, you'll then have a custom view that matches as though you're turning the camera in the virtual scene. So it's a very realistic experience. It's just not as immersive because it's not filling your full field of view, but it's very flexible in terms of its delivery methods. Again, in terms of virtual reality, there's two main types of virtual reality. The first being passive VR, which anyone who's experienced Google Street View has experienced passive VR, or some of the 360 images or videos that are prevalent in the residential real estate market. You can click on an arrow or click on an area of an image, jump from image to image. You can look around in each image, but you can't make any changes. You can't freely navigate. It's not a dynamic experience. So that's why it's called passive virtual reality. In terms of active virtual reality, that's more along the lines of having the game controllers, being able to interact with the scene, make changes to the scene, for example, for, say, a new housing development, being able to choose custom materials and surfaces for the kitchen, the flooring, the cabinets, not only seeing those changes happen in real time, but actually calculating the costs of them as you make those choices. So those are the two primary categories of virtual reality. And so here's, just in case of those who have not realized it, you can take a Google Street View experience and actually merge it with an interior scene. So you can go from inside to outside seamlessly using the Google Street View. But then again, it's still based upon capturing a photograph of an existing property that's staged and is ready for photography. It can't show a future state of a building that doesn't exist or is going to be remodeled. And so there are limitations as to what can it do. But it also is very prevalent in the use of existing properties, has a quick turnaround and a very low cost barrier to entry.
And here ties back into what we were just saying before, where, have you ever used virtual reality and have you seen it used? And, some people are going to say no. And yet I'll bet that most people have actually used Google Street View to some degree. And that right there is a form of passive VR.
So in terms of active virtual reality, this little video snippet is showing the capability of doing daylight sun studies. We can change the time of day. We can move around freely. We can have animated videos and audio throughout the scene. We can make changes to the furniture or the amenities, depending on the situation, change color, texture, move things around, save the configuration for future use. And then, of course, if there's data tied to the various changes, track that and keeping a running bill of materials running as the changes are made with the customer. They're working with you. In addition to be able to freely walking around, you can use the mini map to jump from point to point, from floor to floor, or to the ground floor. And so you're not limited in terms of how you navigate. We're not tied to the physics of reality and gravity. And you can see here that we actually represent very large areas. This is the entire downtown Los Angeles area. And there for a minute, you can see the Hollywood sign in the background. So we can do very large expanses with active virtual reality.
And think about this too when you look at the active virtual reality is, consider how you're currently doing business, consider how you're currently sharing information with somebody, and what that looks like when you're trying to explain what an area looks like, or how like we have here, the sunlight study. So let's say that you have a piece of property that you're developing, and you want to see how the buildings around it would affect the lighting during the day on that property before it's built. These are all important aspects. And then, as Mike was saying here, you're able to interact in the environment, make adjustments, make changes to it, pre-visualize it, and, think about how you're doing it right, albeit with images or with 2D floor plans, and, see how we're able to take information now and put it into a far greater, better visualization and understanding. And ultimately, that's what that comes down to with this is, where you may have stacks of pages of a PDF or a website with so many pages of information or, whatever it might be. We're able to do all of that now with VR and give somebody an active experience where they can go through they can make decisions, they can understand it, and they can interact with it, and they can come away with a greater understanding, in the terms that they need.
I think a couple of other points, maybe to think about the why you might do it in that case, and that was actually CBRE's headquarters in LA that we worked on. Part of what they wanted to do was show the cultural change that was taking place, and to showcase an office of the future and what it would be like. So it was both for them to work with customers about what a future office environment should be like, as well as for their agents, and to work internally to communicate a cultural change for an open office environment, shared workflow, shared workspaces, and all the things that come with that, and the ability to prepare their people for a new environment. So it can be used in the envisioning of a space for sale or lease, as well as for an incorporation and communication of cultural change that would be to come.
So in the next two levels of virtual experiences that are extended, augmented reality is where you have artificial or digital information overlaid on top of a video of the real world. So in this case, you're seeing somebody looking down the street, and it's overlaid with information of locations or stores that the person may be interested in. And so that's one level of augmented reality. Another level that's much higher is called mixed reality. So instead of just overlaying information on top of your view of the real world, it actually interacts with the virtual objects, and the real world objects in your scene are merged together, so that objects in the virtual scene, in this case in the underwater scene, if you reach out to a fish, the scene knows where your hand is, the fish knows where your hand is, it'll actually respond to you. So in that case, you're mixing reality's interactions with the virtual interactions simultaneously. So as this example shows here, the latest translation tool for phones is you can actually look at a sign in one of 100 languages, have it translated into your language, converted to a graphic that looks exactly like the same sign, and then have it overlaid over that sign on your video screen. So you can read any language, including menus, streets, maps. They now can all be translated seamlessly and almost in real time. This next visual is for doing augmented reality of doing a floor layout. And so in this particular case, the user is using a phone to simply look at the floor. The program is able to analyze the floor, calculate the perimeter, the area, map out the tile, and have them manipulate it, but also do realistic lighting, as you can see here. So you can do what-if scenarios with countless types of flooring, types of orientation, and then make a decision without ever having to have all the samples brought out. This last example of mixed reality, again, is showing how the real world and the virtual world are merged together. So in this case, the scene knew that he pushed on the wall, and therefore the virtual walls are responding. In this case, the camera that's on top of the door knows where you are, so the view into that doorway is being calculated based upon your location in real time. So again, the virtual world is responding to actions in the real world, and vice versa. So our third polling question is, have you had any experience using any of the following technologies between passive virtual reality, the 360 images or tours, active virtual reality, which is computer generated, augmented reality, mixed reality, or if you're unsure? So the polling is open. Okay, that's where we're stabilized. With 56% voting, 89% have experienced passive VR, 53% have experienced active VR or augmented reality, 16% have experienced mixed reality, and 11% are unsure. Which actually I find it, I'm quite impressed by the fact that over half of you have experienced augmented reality, since that's kind of the next technology on the horizon that's becoming more mainstream. So one of the things that we've categorized different user experiences is depending upon the use case and what type of aspect of real estate you're involved in. For example, if you're a broker, you may have a budget that's limited to doing visualizations of properties at a certain level and not have all the needs for the complexity and functionality that our higher end solutions provide, as in terms of the middle demonstrations. In addition, we're able to do real-time test fits over the web that allow you to do iterative designs with your client on a tablet and saving you days or weeks instead of going back and forth between an architect, the designer, the clients, and doing multiple iterative reviews. So I'm going to hand control over to Chris so we can give some demonstrations. And I hand over.
Okay.
We're now
see my
looking
screen?
at Chris's screen. Yep.
All right, perfect. All right, let me start this guy up. Okay, so what I want to show you here, and hopefully this builds some ideas on, that it's not easy to get into, it's not easy to share and whatever. What I want to show here is that, maybe what your typical way of marketing is that, you show a static rendering of, a site that doesn't exist, or maybe you show 2D floor plans and, and this is how you're sharing the information. Well, what VR can do for you right now, what I'm doing is I'm showing you a website. So this is embedded in a website, and I'll, once that loads up super quick, let's scroll through. So we've just got this VR tour sitting inside of Chrome, and so long as you have a web-enabled device, be it your phone, be it a tablet, or regular computer, you can have a virtual tour or virtual reality tour inside of a web browser. And you can see, it's very, very, very simple. I'm just clicking, dragging, I'm looking around. This is full 3D. And what this means and why this is important is I have the ability to go in and customize the space as well. I'll move forward here a little bit. And what you're going to see here now is, with one click of this option right here, I have the ability to go in and take a look. Well, what would the space look like if I had, this type of counter? I had this type of counter, and I can even change out the cabinets. You come in here, once again, super easy. Click, and I have got a customized in my browser that anybody can get into. Anybody can experience the space, and it's very easy and very cost effective, about the same price as doing a traditional 2D rendering. And even what's even better about this is the idea that we can go in and if somebody's not too comfortable, or let's say you're giving a presentation on a space, you can come in here and hit the auto tour, and in VR, you can have a tour of space that runs through section on phone. So, really the big takeaway from this is it's not expensive. That's a big one. It's the same cost, as what you're used to doing with traditional media. And the other takeaway is it's better than traditional media. It's better than 2D floor plans, because now I can take a look at this site and, from an overhead perspective, I can, look down on it. I can move around. I can zoom into particular areas. And, the hope is that when you're showing off a space or somebody's experiencing, a space, is that, a 2D floor plan or a rendering is one vantage point. That's all it is. But here we have full interactivity. So maybe I do want to focus on one particular area, and I can take a look at that if I like. I can tell the story of the space based on how I want to see it. So that's how virtual reality really, really is so much better than any 2D media that you may be used to for marketing. The other aspect here, and so we'll start this guy up. Once again, super quick click. This is a link that can be shared to anybody. And once again, embedded in a website or just shared. You can see here's your typical 2D overhead plan of an undeveloped site. And so for investment property, if you're trying to come up with a visualization of what maybe this would look like with the actual buildings in place and the parking lot and everything else, this doesn't cut it. This doesn't help to understand and explain, the site. But what we can do here is now we can switch this over and we can start getting a much better understanding and, different viewpoints of what this looks like. So this is, full 3D, once again, just sitting inside a web browser. Super easy, super simple. I can come in here and I can even just walk around. I can look around left and right. And one click on the ground takes me to where I want to go. And if you have a pair of, the Google Cardboard that Mike was pointing out earlier, and you've got your phone, this works on a phone too. That's great. But you look at a spot and you'll go there. So you have a very, very easy to use, very effective tool for pre-visualization and for marketing. And then finally, so let's say you've got in this particular case, there was an office space, that's for lease. We'll keep this box over here. The typical idea here is that you're going to show it as a 2D floor plan. And let's go outside and take a look at this real quick. So, up here in the left-hand corner, we've got your standard 2D rendering of, the proposed space. And, this building wasn't built yet. And they start getting some interest in pre-leasing this. So, what better a way than to actually have the 3D space available in a link. Anybody can get to it, and you can view it from any vantage point and understand clearly, where are the doors, where are the windows. I can come down to the top viewpoint here, and the 2D floor plan. I'm trying to figure out, well, geez, where are the windows? Where are the doors? How big is this? How is this laid out? I can just jump right into it. And, like I said, this is accessible to anybody. And this is VR. And it's a far more effective tool for telling the story of the space and understanding what it is that what you're representing and what your vision is for it, and conveying that to the clientele as well. Okay.
Just give a time count. We're at 38 minutes in.
Okay. All right, I'm going to start this up. Do you mind opening the discussion on this, Mike, while this loads up a little bit?
Certainly. So this is a student housing project that's the clients needed to do pre-leasing the student housing the year prior to construction completion. And so they had no way of giving a virtual tour of showrooms or any of the staged apartment units. And so with that, we were able to demonstrate all of the spaces. And from that, they were able to actually pre-lease 93% of the units in that first year, which is an increase of 8% over what was expected. So a large improvement in the return on investment for this.
Yeah, and so here's another aspect of VR that you may not be aware of, and this is something that can be very important, very helpful. For this particular developer, wanting to go to market and pre-lease, he didn't really have a full understanding of the interior design and how he wanted everything to look. And for a student housing complex, he had an idea and an attitude that he wanted to convey. And so what you can find happen with VR is that it has so many applications and can be so valuable to so many different areas of need. So for this particular project here, the value was in being able to visualize the colors of paint on the wall, and make a decision on what does a yellow paint from Sherwin-Williams look like here, combined with a different type of wood finish on the wall next to it, and how do all these different elements come into play. And eventually, after going through multiple iterations in virtual reality, he was able to come up with a color scheme, palette, and different surfaces that he was able to say, okay, hey, you know, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Let me take this to my design team and let me show this off and let me see, you know, how we can implement this. And, you know, and like Mike pointed out earlier, you know, any time that we have this information in here and we have an understanding of the square footage of the cost of something, we can give the cost implications as well. So anything you see in here in terms of surface and, you know, even furniture and information, in the end, can be calculated. So we just go right up here to one of the units and show that, you know, pre-visualization and staging, how effective and how important it is. So, you know, as we look around inside this space, you know, picture putting on a, you know, a virtual reality helmet and looking left and right and feeling the sense of presence that that brings to this environment. So, you know, I can see a picture, I can see a floor plan, and I can have somebody try and tell me, you know, left and right how great it's going to be, or how good it's going to look, or imagine this. And you know, the key here is trying to remove the barrier of imagination, because not everybody can do that, and not everybody's going to understand through a picture or a couple of pictures exactly what this is going to be for them. You know, and for especially for student housing, and you know, you think about, you know, kids are going to go off to school and they're going to be living, you know, possibly far away from home. You know, you want to get them excited. You want them to understand exactly what it is that, you know, they'd be expecting. And you want to drum up that level of excitement and interest. And what better way to do that than by showing off, you know, one of the amenities, which in this case is the poolside. You know, I'll come back to this again and again that, you know, there's a large difference in marketing a property and bringing the understanding to somebody through an image and through words and through text and through tons of pages of information. But in a VR environment, when I'm there, I'm there. I mean, the hot tub here has got the, you know, the steam coming off it. We've got a fireplace. We've got the poolside here with the running water, you know, and you can see, you know, we've got these cabanas up, you know, situated throughout the property, and trying to visualize this or understand this with somebody telling you how great it is, it just doesn't cut it. You know, VR is not only the way to do it, it's becoming and is the expected way to do it.
And from a developer standpoint, for a new construction like this, you already have a marketing budget for your images, your renderings, some animations for streaming over the web. What's interesting, if you apply some of that budget to doing the virtual reality experience, we can render out high resolution renderings and videos from this VR experience to give you traditional media as well.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a very, very important point.
Yeah, I know applies, and just to bring it sort of full circle with the different sensory messages that come through, is that the sound of the water, the sound of the birds or the fireplace, and all of that becomes part of that immersive experience. So it's not just looking at a picture, but it's really getting the emotional attachment into space. And again, this is residential applications, but it works just as well on the commercial side to get people engaged in a process, more fully engaged in a space and in the interaction with the space to make it their own. By
Exactly.
You know, by putting,
yep. And we talk about that in terms of presence. Yep, that's it. Exactly. In a nutshell, it's presence, and it's getting somebody in there virtually, but really feeling like you're there. That's a big deal.
In this case, this is for Exxon Mobil for their huge landing headquarters in Texas. And similar to the project for CBRE, this was their new Work Environment 3 concept. They wanted to educate and do a work simulation for their employees for familiarization, so that when they're relocating, before they relocated here, they would know where everything was, where their desks were, what types of functional rooms that were open space and designed for different purposes were located, and how they were to be used and designed for. All of that was done before the construction was completed. And so that definitely helps transition the employees from their current offices that were distributed to this one new headquarters of multiple buildings on site.
Yeah, and and here's a small tidbit here is that both Mike and I, have backgrounds doing military simulation. So we were both at Lockheed Martin, and the one thing that we can attest to is that the military understands the value of familiarization. When you go into a virtual environment and you interact, you move, you look, you go around a virtual environment, it's as good as doing it in the real thing. So, if I'm over in another country, if I'm in a state, if I'm even 20 minutes away and I can't go somewhere, I just don't have the time, I don't have the ability. I can go in a virtual environment, I can walk through it, I can familiarize myself with it, I can understand it, and then the minute I walk in the door of the real place, I know exactly where I'm going because I've been there. It's not a matter of, trying to say, let me look at my little map on here, or somebody told me I make the second left to this right, to that left, to this right. It's none of that. I've been through the space. I've familiarized myself with it. I just understand it. That's the power of being in a virtual environment.
One of the other things I don't think you mentioned, but I think is really compelling about this, and particularly as you talked about people dispersed geographically, is that you can actually do this tour with many people coming into the space and taking the tour together. And they could actually be looking at different things if they wanted to, but you can interact collaboratively like we're doing on this webinar, going through the tour, looking at, interacting, and fully engaging with the space.
That's an excellent point, Jeff. In fact, yeah, and the term for that, that they've used in gaming is massive multiplayer online. They use the term gaming, but massive multiplayer environment is multiple people coming into a virtual world at the same time, and that is very much a product of what we do and how we help people communicate throughout a virtual spaces. Picture, saying you want to show a space, you want to familiarize yourself with it. You even want to have a meeting in a virtual space. That's another aspect as well. No matter where you are, you can be in the same place as other individuals without having to jump on a plane, jump on a car, jump on a train. All you need to do is just get on your computer, and you can all be in the same shared space at the same time. Very important. Shut you down. Yep. This guy.
So in this example, this is for a urban planning type environment of downtown Raleigh. We're going to be showing some different technologies of data overlay, building exchanges to see how the impacts are, and also showing the fact that we can do larger environments than just individual sites or properties.
Yeah. And so, as Mike was saying, so we're in downtown Raleigh on something called Fayetteville Street right now. And so as you can see, once again, this is a much larger representation of a virtual environment. And, let's say that you are trying to visualize where leasable office space is. So what you can do in virtual reality is, you take a look here. We've got these, stacking plan style boxes set up throughout the street and down the street. And, just by going over it, you can see we've got the information, for the location, the phone number, fax number, and, whatever we want it to be. But, in this case, it's the leasable area and who to contact. And, breaking the laws of real world physics, click takes us up to the actual space. Let's say we want to see this office. We could drop into it. We could walk through it, and we can gain a greater understanding of the space itself and take a virtual tour of it and, do this throughout all downtown Raleigh. what we've been showing so far is how effective it is at showing one individual space. Well, think about that in terms of a much larger scope and being able to go to a virtual environment and crawl through pieces of information everywhere and dive into it and experience it yourself. And so we'll drop over here. And in terms of, let's say, economic development and city planning, this part I think would be very interesting to you. So, what we have here is we have this, it's an old hair salon. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's an old building that, we're looking at changing out to a different type of business. And, normally that would require a bit of renderings, paper drawings, and different charts to show all this information. What we can do now is we can go in, into the virtual environment and say, what is it like if you have an Apple store? And pop that right in there. And what is it like if there's a McDonald's store? So in VR, you can get a greater understanding of the footprint of a building, what it looks like in a space. You can also, what we can do is tie into the, some background data, and VR can tie into that data and show what would be the impact of this decision on maybe, let's say there's McDonald's here. There's a Chick-fil-A right across the street. How does that impact that? What would be the anticipated impact to that business by putting this business here? And conversely, what if it was changed out to another? What if Apple was here? How would that help, Chick-fil-A or some, possible competing businesses down the street? And what would that mean in terms of foot traffic? What would that mean in terms of, cars and parking and revenue generation? How do all these decisions tie into, what you would ultimately decide upon and make smart decisions? And that's really ultimately what it is. It's not just a visualization tool, and it doesn't just, help you see what you can do. It helps you make better decisions by tying into real world data, feeding it through, and you're hearing a lot about artificial intelligence now, feeding it through AI and then making predictive analyses of these decisions. So VR is more than just taking a tour of a property. It's making better decisions along the way as well, especially if you're a developer or, whatever that might be.
Right. So I'll move on to the test fit.
Okay.
Screen. So in test fit, you're able to then, you're working on a tablet or a computer mobily with your client. You may have a vacant commercial property, and your goal is to determine if the 20 employees and the number of conference rooms that they're going to have will actually fit this space. So using very simple tools in this interface over the web, I'm able to actually lay out some walls. I'm going to lay out a conference room here initially. This is a simple example.
Yeah, and while Mike's doing this, the thing to keep in mind is how are you currently doing it, or how have you done it? If you've got somebody coming to the space and they're looking for certain requirements, and the typical workflow is, okay, you take this, you write down all these requirements, you send it off to an architect or a bureau, or it might be that you want to get this together and say, okay, I need to fit 20 people, I need 2 break rooms. Think about the time that it takes to have that information sent back to you, get back with the possible client, sit with them and say, here's what we've got. How does this work for you? How does this fit your needs? Maybe they change their mind and looking at 5 other properties in the area. And, ultimately you're sending it back out for revisions. Maybe you're drawing on top of plans that you've got. It's a messy and it's a time-consuming process. And you've got somebody looking at different properties, not just the one. You've got them looking at multiple properties to find out what's going to work for them. So, ultimately, VR is now able to be put into your hands in such a way that you can do test fits and you can get people to understand the space. And let's say on the fly, you can sit with them and they can say, you know, I decided I need 2 conference rooms split in half, not one big conference room. Well, with VR now, it's possible for you to just go in on your tablet, make those adjustments, make those changes on the fly in real time without having to send it off, without having to draw over another design. And, you know, these decisions don't take weeks or months. They take hours at the most, hours. And, you know, it changes how you do business, period. And it changes how somebody understands the business. And if you're not doing it this way, the guy down the street probably is. And, you know, if you're representing, you know, a property and you're not using virtual reality, that's really kind of the takeaway from this, is that other people are, and if you're not, you may be falling behind, you know, quicker than you realize. This isn't some niche product that, you know, that people are using just here and there. A lot of folks are using, a lot of folks are realizing, you know, the value in it and using it to great effect as well.
One of the things to note, I know we need to wrap up and we'll have to get to questions, but a couple of years ago, CBRE actually bought Floored, which was one of the other providers of this type of technology in the industry, to embed and integrate it and make it widely available to all of their clients and agents. So as Chris was saying, that you know, certainly it's pervasive throughout that organization, and then these types of tools give you the same type of capability at in a very affordable unit by unit model, rather than having to buy a company to be able to do it.
So one last poll, concluding up with the presentation. So based on everything we've discussed today, what is the likelihood that you'll use VR in the future? You know, number one, I see a fit for a project I'm working on. I see a fit for a project in the pipeline. No pending project, but I plan to use it when relevant. Or I'm still not sure I have a use for it. So opening up the poll.
Looks like all the votes that are coming are in. One more second.
Okay, so with 54% voting, we have 43% have a current project that has a fit for it. 36% have no pending project but plan to use it. And 21% have a project in the pipeline where there'd be a fit for virtual reality. So one of the things we'll definitely be doing as a follow-up to this presentation is sending out an email with links to some of these demonstrations. Of course, you're always welcome to attend one of our weekly demonstrations, or we can set up one-on-one meetings or discussions to discuss virtual reality and your specific opportunities to make custom applications as you need. But in general, I think the overall theme is virtual reality is definitely moving forward. If you're not already buying your ticket or getting on board, it's definitely going to be leaving you behind soon, given the fact that 66% of the market is looking for it and expecting it. And so if you want to learn more information, please feel free to contact us at the information provided. But again, we'll be sending out an email to each of you as soon as this session is over for a follow-up. We'll open it up for any questions. There's a questions function in the webinar. So if you happen to have any questions, feel free to type them in there. We'll be glad to answer them as people have time.
I'll add really quick while people are typing in some questions. Hopefully we get some here. You know, like Mike said, you know, we do this every week. We have a demonstration every week that we are more than happy to either do separately with you one-on-one, or you can just attend, you know, the standard demo. You know, and Mike and I love doing this stuff. We are really big, you know, VR advocates, and not only do we do it, but we wholeheartedly know can help you, and and we can hopefully get you into another demo, and then speak a little more specifically with whatever projects you have, and and then we can tailor a discussion specifically suited to what we think and how we can help you the best.
Well, that's great, guys. We really appreciate it. Right on the hour mark. It seems that by the fact that 0% are still unsure, you solved or you accomplished your objective for the day. Everyone knows that there's some value either now or in the future, and I think you now understand the wide application and benefits that exist for this type of technology to help accelerate marketing programs, accelerate capital raise, accelerate approval process, and build out, and that, as you said, it effectuates the decision-making process. So really glad that everyone was able to attend today, and really appreciate you taking the time, Mike and Chris, and sharing with us. And we look forward to following up with everyone in the days and weeks to come to hopefully get you back into a one-on-one type of environment where we can work together to see how this can apply to your day-to-day business and certain projects that are coming forward. So with that, we will wrap it up. Again, appreciate all your time and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.